26th of July, 1962. That's the day that my grandfather passed away. And my grandmother was left with 9 kids. My mother was the second youngest, and my uncle Chicho is the third youngest. His smell, his hugs, his loving ways, his half-boiled egg at 6 o'clock in the afternoon every single day at the exact time. His keen interest in dyeing his hair when he became older, which I should probably take a leaf out of the book of. He must be looking at me and laughing. His athletic prowess, his obsession with, when he became older, toilet paper, a moisturizing cream. Chicho grew up in complex family dynamics, a female raising 9 kids in Venezuela in 1962. Some of them were very young. My mom was 6. Was no easy task, and he grew up in a country with little or no support for Down syndrome kids. He was born Down syndrome, Chicho. And his chances of thriving were already very limited at that stage. Instead, Chicho, his capabilities of being and doing were supported, were motivated, were stimulated, were recognized, and were celebrated by the family. He was disproportionately attended to. He was disproportionately loved. Equality wasn't the thing. 9 kids equal love. Chicho was born Down syndrome. He needed disproportionate love and attention, and he got it. He was very lucky. He lived 60 fully active years. 60 fully active years. He attended school, he worked for a while, he competed in the Venezuelan Special Olympics a few years, and it wasn't because of inertia, it wasn't because of inaction, it was because of a disproportionate approach to supporting him to thrive, challenging norms, honoring dignity, and being unwilling to waste even an inch of his capabilities of doing and being, and his spirit lives with us. I also saw the other side of inaction. Inaction as a violent act. And I put myself in that situation. I grew up in the middle class, which keeps shrinking, of a very wealthy country, naturally wealthy, weather wealthy, people wealthy, with a huge amount of poverty. The majority of the population have been in poverty for a number of years. And when I was a teenager, I had a loving family, I had access to good education. In fact, the motto for our education was to serve and to love, and I've carried that in my heart forever, actually. I had access to good health care. That was my morning. At 1:30, the school finished, and I went from the age of 13 out to play with the state team or with the national youth team. And I met a different group of people, a much more diverse group of people, where not all of them, in fact, very few of them, had the same life circumstances as I did. Now, that contrast when you're a teenager is kind of challenging, because you realize that we're all the same. You love people for who they are, you become friends, you build camaraderie and warmth and so on. And in the context of teenage years, there's always humor, and that humor can be warm, and it can also be raw and cruel, unintentionally. So I heard sometimes from one side jokes about the other side that were appropriate and jokes that were inappropriate, and I ignored it. I stood by, and I look back, and I know I should have acted, and it pains me to say that I should have acted, but I should have called it out. I shouldn't have walked past it so easily. I could have done more in the training ground. I could have done more outside the training ground. I could have done more in school. I could have done more outside of school. That inaction was violence. That inaction, even though it was small, it was multiplied by millions of people who didn't grow up in poverty. And the consequence of the inaction, even though it's just one of the contributing factors to what's happened in Venezuela, has been deterioration of the social climate, resentment, and it's led to millions being unable to fulfill their capabilities of doing and of being. In the end, we all lose. In the end, we fail to take advantage of the collective wisdom and power, not of the few, but of the many. If I extrapolate that to the world, this violent inaction means we're wasting the power and the will and the possibilities of not millions, but billions of people. And we can't afford that in the world that we live in right now. Our fraternal collective cannot continue to walk by this. We need to work on this. It's on us, with each other, for each other, to build a different legacy wherever we live, one that honors dignity, agency, and disproportionately addresses some of the gaps that we see. The table is set in a way. The polarization that we see even in this city with Democrats and Republicans, the polarization I see in the UK with conservatives and Labour, polarization I see in Venezuela with Chavistas and the opposition. It's extreme, and part of the work of health equity leaders like yourselves is to build bridges of understanding, build bridges of love, build bridges of possibility. Poverty continues to rise in Latin America alone. 200 million people live in poverty. 86 million of those live in extreme poverty. Over the world, it's over 1 billion people. And we continue to see systemic challenges around racism and sexism and classism and so on. Just in the US, to give you a figure, there was a calculation recently published of the cost of systemic racism to the economy from the year 2000 up until the year 2020. The estimate is $16 trillion. I don't even know how many zeros there are in a trillion, but I imagine there's a lot. And behind the $16 trillion is real human suffering. The pandemic that we're still in has shone a light on inequities. Those most vulnerable are the ones that have suffered the most. And the most violent form of inaction that I've seen in recent years happened throughout the pandemic in the form of the vaccine inequities around global distribution. Really painful to hear the messages that weren't said of you matter less, we'll take care of ourselves, you matter less, and part of the world not being vaccinated. Climate change is increasing anxiety. So report after report after report, we know the figures. So it's not about writing more reports, it's about doing. We need disproportionate action. I am filled with hope, though. In the last year, in both Latin America and Europe, I've seen many projects that fill me with hope. The work in England about Core 20+5, tackling proactively the most deprived 20% of the population across every GP practice in the country in 5 domains. The work of hashtag 2035 in Westminster Council, which is trying to halve the life expectancy gap by 2035, which is 14 years. The efforts in Latin America to provide care for children with cancer, not the few, but all children across 100 hospitals in 6 countries. The Health Improvement Alliance Europe work around equity, conversation by conversation, committing to equity as individuals, as teams, and as organization. And of course, the fellowship project, the ambitious idea of launching the first ever Latin America Hospitals for Health Equity network, and the number of dialogues that continue to happen around that across 4 countries. So these are leaders willing to listen to each other, to build bridges, to truly co-design with and for the communities they serve. In doing this work over the last year, and I have this here, my wife convinced me to finally get glasses because I kept squinting. And I have put on a refined set of glasses to have a refined view of the world. And I've been asking myself 2 questions every couple of months. One, who am I becoming? To do this work, you need to really, truly test your coherence as a human being. And the second question, what am I prepared to ignore? And that tests my honesty. That keeps me really honest. So I invite you to consider those 2 questions regularly. Who are you becoming? And what are you prepared to ignore? As we build bridges to cross health equity gaps and health equity chasms, wherever you are, I have a suggestion. I think we need to be unreasonable in 5 ways. I think we need to be unreasonably disproportionate. We need to proactively address equity gaps in a very targeted and segmented way. We need to be unreasonably proactive. This is not about inertia. This is not about inaction. This is about proactivity. And in order to be disproportionate and proactive, we need to be unreasonably loving, unreasonably courageous, and unreasonably peaceful. So don't be discouraged by the enormity of the task. Take inspiration from the possibilities to close health equity gaps wherever you are for those and with those we serve. And when it feels impossible, just be reminded of this phrase I learned from a swimming coach. You have to swim slow to swim well. You have to swim well to swim fast. Even if it feels slow at times, it will pick up. 12th of April 2022, today, as we close this chapter of our fellowship, I want to invite you, alone and together, to join me in building bridges across health equity gaps and customs wherever you are, to bring health equity to the table often and relentlessly. And as you are biased to action, to act unreasonably, in a proactive way, in a disproportionate way, in a loving way, in a courageous way, and in a loving way, and in a peaceful way. Let's build a different legacy. We owe it to each other.